On today's edition of the show, we've spoken all about throughout the playoff run, how about all the superstar players who have helped get to the Florida Panthers to this point. But on today's show, we're going to discuss all the unsung heroes that helped the Florida Panthers get to this point where they are now in the Stanley Cup Final.
You're Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into this Friday, June 2nd edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez, and you can follow me on Twitter at Monoman12. Follow the show account on Twitter and Instagram at LO_FLA Panthers. And shout out to all the everydayers who come back here to get your daily Florida Panthers fix. So, Cats fans, once this recording drops, it'll be one more sleep until the Florida Panthers play a hockey game again. So very excited to for this wait to finally be over. But it is a Friday, which means it is a Fairbanks Friday edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, which means Nick Fairbanks is here. Nick, welcome back to a Stanley Cup Final edition of Fairbanks Friday.
It still doesn't feel real. Just happy to be here and looking forward to that puck drop in about 2 days.
Yeah, and I tweeted this from my personal account, and we're recording on June 1st. This is a June 2nd drop. And on this day in 1996, the Florida Panthers clinched their spot in the Stanley Cup Final when they went to Pittsburgh Civic Arena and defeated the Pittsburgh Penguins by a final score of 3-1. Tom Fitzgerald gets the game-winning goal in the third period. Beezer goes 39 of 40. Of course, I was 3 during that time, so I have no memories of it. But, of course, watching the highlights from that time and the history behind the Florida Panthers, of course, I know Casey Fitzgerald isn't playing, isn't active every night. But it's a little bit of full circle there for the Panthers being in this position as they're 2 days away from game one of the Stanley Cup Final. So it's just so surreal for this run. I'm sure a lot of people who have been through 96 to now are just thinking, wow, what a change of events all throughout the turmoil years and rumors of ownership change as well and relocation. And also, it's great to be talking a Stanley Cup Final game and preview show with you. But I do want to go right into the topics of we've spoken all about the heroes of this playoff run: Bobrovsky, Matthew Tkachuk, Barkov as well, and even the defense core players like a Montour, Forsling, Ekblad, but there are a few unsung heroes in this run as well, and it's mostly based on really articles that have been put out recently. One of them is especially by David Dork, which was a great piece. I actually texted him like 2 hours before we hit record saying, "Hey, that Alex Lyon piece that you had was really great. I'm really glad to have seen the human side of things." But Nick, just of course, you never want to lose your starting job in the National Hockey League. And of course, the Panthers needing a spark for this playoff run when Bobrovsky was inserted in the latter part of game 3 and then starting game 4. But Alex Lyon talking about trying to be a positive influence. And I think the most telling part and the most important part of that article that David Dork wrote and the perspective from Alex Lyon was when he spoke about coming in during a blowout in the regular season when down 4-0 versus needing to stay ready, and especially spoke about really the 4 overtime game, which you never know is going to happen. It comes on the fly as well, but also being the biggest cheerleader on the bench, more importantly, and being that good vibe for the team.
Definitely. And let's start it off. This team wouldn't be where it would without Alex Lyon. So kudos and hats off to you, sir. Thank you very much for stepping up when the team needed you most, staying in the moment, which I think is the most important thing right now for this team to do, but also not taking it personally when the team has to make a change. He didn't play terribly during the Boston series, but you could just tell that there might have been exhaustion or there might have been just an overwhelming of emotions. So, Maurice definitely did say, like, hey, I want to put Bob in for game 5. He needs to have that pressure. Look what the Panthers have done since then. They're 11-1. So not only is Alex Lyon, he was huge during the season, but he's also paid dividends here in the postseason. I mean, you said he's been the cheerleader. I remember seeing him after game 2 of the Eastern Conference Final when Chuck was saying, hey, let's go home. Let's get back to Florida as fast as possible. He was cheering like in that section when they opened up the glass. Like he was just like pumping up and just slapping everybody as they're going by and everything. And, it kind of stinks because he's away from everybody in that section. But at the same time, like you get 2 games right in a row where Chuck puts it away. And he has basically the same celebration, and it's just madness. So I would love to be a part of that or see what he feels, during that time.
No doubt. And also he spoke about how he's practiced a little bit of juggling as well. And also helping that with his mind as well when it comes to learning that skill. And I can't juggle. I can juggle with 2, but is that really juggling? No, not necessarily. But another piece that I saw was from NHL.com is Emily Benjamin, and this one is more of a different circumstance, of course, with Patrick Hornqvist. Of course, we haven't seen him play since December 3rd as well, but also he's been skating. He's been in that yellow or gold non-contact jersey as well, but let's also not forget that this was Bill Zito's first transaction of creating that trade with the Pittsburgh Penguins, and of course needing someone who's mean, annoying, a net front presence, and of course, hey, they got a younger version of that a few years later named Matthew Tkachuk. Look, one transaction led to another, but also needing that voice in the locker room as well, and encouraging guys behind the scenes every single day as well. Even before they come out and we as the fans and media see when they hit the ice. And just the 2 years of the two Stanley Cup championship experiences is so crucial for a guy who's helping this team stay locked in.
He's the ultimate professional. Everything he's done since he's come to Florida has benefited the team and the organization. He could have, fought back and saying, hey, listen, I understand that I had 2 concussions within a month this year, but, by January and March, maybe April, I'm ready to go. He's kind of taking the long view of this one, which I'm really glad he is, because not only is it benefiting his health, but it's benefiting his family and everybody else around him. I don't know if he would have the same impact that he does right now on the team if he was playing, because he'd be more focused on what's going on in the game and what he has to do instead of building these guys up and really trying to get the most out of them. So there's one memory that I have of him. It was actually in game 4 of the Eastern Conference Finals. Everybody's coming into the tunnel and everything. And he's like the first guy out there instead of the trainers, taking all the gloves and the sticks and stuff like that. But he's there hugging everybody, high-fiving and everything. And, I tweeted out, like, just seeing Horny in that hallway, I'm not crying, you're crying. He's probably been the best. I don't want to say the best acquisition, but he was the most needed at the time. The team needed direction, they needed an identity, and Zito hit a home run with it.
No doubt. And of course, quick before we transition, of course, Zach Dalpe as well, of course, coming in and getting that huge goal in game 6, and of course, earning that extension, the 2-way extension for the Florida Panthers. Of course, Dalpe having that experience with Bill Zito, the familiarity in the Columbus Blue Jackets organization. And of course, we could also relate it to the other side with Phil Kessel with the Vegas Golden Knights. Of course, he had the Iron Man streak going, and of course, it doesn't count towards the in the postseason. Of course, I'm sure on the Vegas Golden Knights side of things that he is being the ultimate professional behind the scenes as well for the Vegas Golden Knights. So that's also what both teams have in common when it comes to their Stanley Cup final runs. But we're going to discuss more in segment number 2 how healthy bodies have been beneficial for both teams. And we're going to talk about a few specific players who have benefited from other players coming back to the ice. We're going to discuss that next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. But first, we're going to tell you all about Game Time. And buying tickets to your favorite event shouldn't be stressful. Game Time is the fastest and easiest way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. With killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for all the fun you have. Forget planning months in advance. Game Time has deals on tickets right up to the day of the event. Get exclusive deals for football, basketball, hockey, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. The Game Time guarantee you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets for the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Download the Game Time app and create an account and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Segment number 2 here on this Friday, June 2nd edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. It is a Fairbanks Friday edition of the show. Nick Fairbanks is back for Stanley Cup Final edition of Fairbanks Friday. So, you know, we spoke about really for the Florida Panthers side of things about how when Sam Bennett came back in Game 2 in the Boston series, that it gave a big spark to the Florida Panthers. But I do want to start off on the opposite side for this Stanley Cup Final preview. And really the one guy who makes another person better when he's in the lineup for the Vegas Golden Knights that we have seen throughout their run to the Stanley Cup Final is when Mark Stone is back. The one guy who has benefited the most has been Chandler Stephenson. And throughout the season, he's been up. He's had to play second line minutes. He's had to play on the wing with Jack Eichel. He's had to be second line center as well. And Mark Stone, of course, we all know how great he is, especially on the defensive side of the puck. I'm not looking forward to his sellies if he scores in the Stanley Cup Final neither. I'm really not looking forward to that. But Mark Stone has missed 39 games this season, has missed a lot of time throughout the last few years, And Stevenson has, for the most part, for most of the season, at 5-on-5, his line has been with Carrier and Phil Kessel, 13 games and a 62 goal differential. And even later in the season, he was starting to get more games with Barbashev and Kessel there with a goal differential of +3 as well. So he's also held his own as well. But he's been even better with Mark Stone being part of the being back from injury in this playoff run. So that is one side of things. And also, let's also not forget, Nick, going into this, that Vegas was the team that lost to the Washington Capitals, where Chandler Stephenson played 24 playoff games for the Caps as well in their run to the final as well. So it's funny, Vegas loses to Washington in that, and then Bruce Cassidy loses to both Barbashev and Pietrangelo in 2019. So it's crazy how all that works, but also crazy to think that on their side, on Vegas' side of things, how one guy makes so many other players better.
Mark Stone has been that player since he was in Ottawa. And as soon as they found out that he wasn't really going to sign an extension, or they couldn't agree on the term, they shipped him off to Vegas, which was crazy. When you have somebody like that on your team, you got to build around him, or that's got to be your centerpiece. And if Chandler Stephenson, if this is just the peak or just the little top that we're seeing on him during these playoffs, the sky's going to be the limit for him, because he's coming up in big moments. He scored couple big goals against Dallas, if I remember correctly, and basically put that team away. And that goal differential that you just put up, like 60-some goals, is there anybody on Florida that's even close to that? I mean, I would like to check that stat at some point, but that's crazy. The defensive battle in this series is going to be what I thought Carolina was going to be. I thought that was going to be just complete defense, and the games were really close, but it just didn't seem like Carolina had it. They didn't have that killer instinct, and they couldn't get the puck past Bob. So I think it's going to be much closer. The margins are going to be that much slimmer, and it's going to come down to players like Stephenson to come up with big plays or big goals like that.
Also, here's another note. Of course, Mark Stone being a veteran in Ottawa, being the captain there. Do you know who he welcomed into his home when he was in Ottawa? Brady Tkachuk.
That's crazy.
And
that's like his first season.
Yeah. And they were talking on the Jeff Merrick show about how Brady is getting married this summer. Very close friends with Mark Stone. And, of course, facing Matthew Tkachuk in the final. So talking about how that wedding could be, who knows how that is going to look in the summer after the Stanley Cup Final as well. But also on the Florida Panthers side of things, we've seen how Bennett being back with the lineup as well, and of course manning that second line. Of course, we've seen how Eric Stahl has had to fill some second line center minutes as well. Even Lundell at times had to lose to rein in as well. But I decided to look deeper into how many times the Cousins Bennett Tkachuk line was together and how many games, and it was only 2 games this season for that line. And it's crazy how also you kind of remember for little stints of the season who's with where. Of course, Paul Maurice is to be a head coach in the National Hockey League, you got to remember the little itty bitty details here, and your memory card in your brain is probably real big too. And just also with that line as well, we spoke about Vegas, and now we're talking about what Sam Bennett has brought to this team when he has become healthy. Of course, the second line was the story in round 2 mostly, and well, excuse me, round 1. But they were that line that got the Panthers going as well. And really, both teams have arrived with health. Both teams have had unsung heroes. Both teams have different paths to get here as far as how their teams have constructed about selling draft picks to build a contender, because it's not your typical build from the bottom up and then and tank and then just build slowly. This is two GMs being aggressive, but also 2 teams getting healthy at the same time, and then of course one's health being beneficial to the other.
To go back to your point about the second line, Sam Bennett coming back, you could tell the team changed in game 2 of the first round. Bennett is the one that scored the first goal for the Panthers that gave them life. And I think they really rallied around that. And then they had to rally again, obviously, in game 5. But Bennett has been a force this whole playoff. I mean, just ask Boston, ask the Toronto Maple Leafs fans. I mean, they will tell you what they think right off the top. And then ask Hurricane fans and Jacob Slavin what they think.
And Matthew Nyes.
Yes. So I don't think he's a guy to be messed with right now. He's in the moment, he's in the zone, and he's doing what he can to not only get under the other team's skin, but he's also playing very well as far as setting up his teammates, making sure that they're in good position. And also, I mean, look at that overtime goal. He could have shot that. I honestly thought he was going to shoot that in game 2 in the Eastern Conference Final. But he made the smart play, passed it down to Reinhart, and then over to Chuck. So maybe some maturity as well and understanding the game a little bit better. But I do want to say something about Nick Cousins. I think his addition to the second line is what has allowed Bennett and Chuck to kind of play their game a little bit more freely because he's got the speed and he'll go dig for pucks. He'll get in there real quick and make sure that they win puck battles. Chuck will do the same, and so will Bennett, but I just feel like he's the more grindy guy. He's the one that will make sure that they get possession, get it back to Chuck or Bennett, and then they can set up their offense from there. So big kudos to him, and we'll see what he does in the Stanley Cup, see if he can do the same thing that he's been doing.
Yeah, and I forget which game it was, but there's a replay of showing of when Sam Bennett is taking a face-off, and then once he wins the face-off and it touches like one of the edges of his skates, like what he uses as far as like the kicking motion as well to get it right back for a possible one-timer chance opportunity as well. So that's also something to look at and to look more into detail whenever you see Sam Bennett, especially in the face-off circle as well. So that's also a really cool thing that we saw on some of the broadcasts throughout the Stanley Cup playoffs as well. But we're gonna transition over to segment number 3. We're gonna talk more about the upcoming media day for the Stanley Cup Final. We're gonna discuss more about the Panthers post-game rituals that we just found out more about. We're gonna discuss the Florida Panthers also. Are they hosting another watch party throughout the Stanley Cup Final? We're going to discuss that next year on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast.
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Segment number 3 here on this Friday, June 2nd edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Nick Fairbanks is back for another edition of Fairbanks Friday, a Stanley Cup Final edition of Fairbanks Friday. So the Panthers, they probably have already arrived in Vegas already, but the reporter said that they were taking a morning flight to Vegas, and Stanley Cup Final media day is on Friday, June 2nd. So maybe something that I'll discuss on our Saturday preview edition with the guys over at Locked On Vegas Golden Knights. But also, I think more and more about what Paul Maurice talks about when it comes to enjoying the journey instead of just enjoying it when the mission is over, because of how, especially how loose the guys have been. And we were talking, if for the listeners out there, if you have not seen the ESPN Plus feature from NHL Original Productions, Quest to the Cup, I highly recommend you guys watch it. You guys will see more of the human side of these players and what a little bit of what they go through on a typical game day. And there was one part where they showed Casey Fitzgerald and Matthew Tkachuk just playing mini golf in Chucky's home and then playing some pool, letting it all loose. This is after they defeat the Toronto Maple Leafs in 5 games as well and getting ready for the Eastern Conference Final. And just also the ability to, I'm not saying it doesn't have to be all hockey all the time, but if you just get so lost in your work, then that could also give you an opportunity to overthink things as well when you do hit the ice as well. So the loose mentality that the Florida Panthers have had in between series and in between games, of course, we as fans view it as house money too, but also the relaxed nature that Paul Maurice also brings to about having fun through the process really speaks volumes to what he brings to the table. And of course, again, it starts with also the GM Bill Zito and Matthew Caldwell.
Definitely. Maurice has done a couple of things, I think, this postseason that has really trademarked or, hallmarked. I mean, we could probably put these on some cards, make some money off of it. But he's had some instances, not only with the media, but, in the Quest for the Cup series that you were just talking about, that really just shows that he's just there to help steer and make sure that they're being guided the right way and that they're doing things the right way. You hear what he talks about during plays or while the play is going on to get pucks deep, get them past the D-men, keep skating, a couple of expletives. I mean, it wouldn't be Paul Maurice if there wasn't a couple of expletives. But the one thing that's really stuck with me from hearing all of that is the players have taken control, which I don't think that's ever happened in Florida's history. I mean, besides maybe 96, but, we saw how that turned out. And then just enjoy the moment, enjoy the journey where they're at and what they're going to be able to possibly accomplish. Don't get too ahead of yourself. Let's just take it one day at a time. And when talking to the press, be humble and don't talk about the future.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And just stay in the moment, stay the course, stay in the moment, and just take it a little bit at a time. And also, one note is what do you? One question more like,
Mm-hmm.
what do you really expect from Media Day tomorrow when these guys do speak? Because there was a Bleacher Report post that I saw of Keith Yandel asking questions to the Panthers players, and it was the Tiny Mike segment about South Florida is, and every single player that was asked said the word buzzing. And it's great and all using that word, but you wish some of the answers were a little different when it comes to being asked that question. So personally, I'm not expecting too many animated responses, especially because you don't want to say something that is old takes exposed when it comes to the opponent on the other side. I don't think you're going to see that from the other side with Jonathan Marchessault as well. I don't think we're going to see any mention of the expansion draft from him or Riley Smith. I think that's more of a thing that we create more than they do as well. But what are you expecting from Media Day tomorrow?
A lot of softball questions. Same questions that have been asked throughout the whole playoff series. How did they get here? What did it take to get you guys, motivated and where you are now? And on the opposite side with Vegas, you guys have been here. You've been in the Western Conference Finals, 4 out of your 6 years of existence. This is your second Stanley Cup trip. For Marchessault and Riley Smith, what is different about this team? What is different, psychologically, on the ice? What is different about this team that you think could get you guys over the top? So that's one question I would like to hear. And to get back to, the draft that we don't really like to talk about, if I were to put money on it, I'd probably say Riley Smith could mention it at some point. I'm not going to say tomorrow, but he could say it. And if he does, I have a good feeling for Florida if he does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we just wonder if it's going to be said, but honestly, not expecting it to say. I am very sure that Bruce Cassidy behind the scenes is probably going to talk to them, both of them. Yeah. It's like when it comes to talking to the media, you don't want to mention this part of it because you don't want to look like that you're out of focus and all, and you want to appear that you are not just appear, but actually be focused on the task at hand of trying to win a Stanley Cup as well. And the thing is, for the Panthers side of things, there's not really much to talk about from their side of things when it comes to, because only like 2 players are left from before the expansion draft, and Barkov and Ekblad. Bill Zito wasn't even the GM. Paul Maurice was still in Winnipeg as well. So if and Barkov and Ekblad, it's not in them to just throw them under the bus neither if they are asked about those questions as well.
Definitely. And let's not act like Marchessault or Riley Smith were terrible players here. They both played very well. Riley, more of a defensive forward, but as I was saying on the last show, that he's very effective on the power play. If he's going to be the screen guy on Bobrovsky, he can handle the puck very well. Marchessault has always been a sniper. I enjoyed watching him play with Florida. Just, again, couldn't come to an agreement on contract, so that's why they kind of let him go for that. But the big thing, I think, is that, as you said, Florida has or any of the players really don't have anything to say. They're playing with house money. They're very loose. They're happy to be here. And they're just focused on one game, one day at a time. Now, with Vegas, to me, I think they have more pressure.
Yes, that is absolutely true.
They just don't want to create an atmosphere where we hear another "we want Florida" type of thing. Because although that wasn't any Leaf player saying that, how much ammunition that gave this Florida franchise to go in there and just take 2 right at home and just cut it. So if Vegas plays this right, then I don't think there's going to be any animosity. There's going to be no bulletin board material there. It's just going to be 2 teams that are very, in my mind and statistically, very similar, that are going to have to grind it out, and maybe the best team win between them.
No doubt. And with both teams having experienced coaches, that definitely is a big factor when it comes to how to conduct yourself as well. But we did announce a few days ago that the Florida Panthers will be hosting a watch party at FLA Live Arena for Game 1, but they also announced a watch party for Game 2, which will be on Monday, June 5th as well. So also, if you guys want a chance to go to the watch party for Games 1 or 2 or even both, you have the opportunity to do so and hang out with all Panther fans as we cheer on the Vegas Golden Knights. The Florida Panthers against the Vegas Golden Knights before they come back home for games 3 and 4. But Nick, I want to thank you so much for joining me on this Fairbanks Friday edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. By the time you come back on the show, it'll actually be a Game 3 post-game edition of the show. So can't wait for you to come back next week on the show. So while we wait for your next appearance, tell everybody where they can follow you online.
Armando, thanks for having me on again. I hope that we have 2 more shows to talk about the season, or maybe 1 and it's over and we win. But everybody can follow me on Twitter at Prudentious0. Looking forward to seeing more fanfare, really show the buzz that, is being talked about, because everybody's talking about it now. So let's have fun. We're only 2 days away as per recording, but 1 day when you're listening to this. So Armando, thank you again.
Thank you so much, Nick, and see you next time, my friend.
See you next time.
And if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On NHL network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey with Flip Livingstone and Steel Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. And come back for tomorrow's edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, everydayers, as we will be doing a crossover edition of the show with the host of Locked On Vegas Golden Knights, Tony Cordasco and Chris Golick. So make sure you come back for tomorrow's edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. So I'm Armando Velez with Nick Fairbanks, and you've been listening to Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day.